Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, and today we are beginning an extraordinary journey into the life of one of the most fascinating women in human history, Nefertiti, the mysterious queen of ancient Egypt, whose beauty, power, and silence have echoed across more than 3,000 years. In this series, we will explore not just the famous face behind the iconic bust, but the living, breathing woman who stood at the center of a revolution that shook the foundations of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Nefertiti lived during the 14th century BCE, in the powerful 18th dynasty, a time when Egypt was wealthy, influential, and deeply rooted in religious tradition, yet she rose alongside Pharaoh Akhenaten during a moment of dramatic transformation that challenged everything Egyptians believed about gods, kingship, and the universe itself. Her name, often translated as "the beautiful one has come," seems almost like an announcement to history, because from the moment she appears in the records, she does not behave like a traditional queen consort. Instead of remaining in the shadows, Nefertiti is shown standing beside the pharaoh at equal scale, performing sacred rituals, wearing crowns usually reserved for kings, and even striking enemies in scenes that symbolized absolute royal power. These images alone suggest that she was not merely Akhenaten's wife, but his political and religious partner, possibly sharing authority in ways that were nearly unprecedented in ancient Egypt. Central to Nefertiti's story is the religious revolution led by Akhenaten, who rejected the age-old worship of many gods and elevated the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, as the supreme divine force. This radical shift shook Egyptian society, angered powerful priesthoods, and redefined how people understood the relationship between humanity and the divine. In this new belief system, Nefertiti played a crucial role, appearing constantly in temple reliefs with Akhenaten and their daughters, receiving the life-giving rays of the Aten, as if divine power flowed directly through the royal family. She was not just a queen, she became a sacred figure, a living symbol of the new faith, standing between God and people. The artistic style of the Amarna period further amplified her uniqueness, breaking away from rigid, idealized forms and embracing a more natural, expressive portrayal of the human body, and it is within this artistic revolution that the world later encountered the famous painted bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912, which transformed her into a global icon of beauty. Yet behind this serene and timeless face lies an era filled with tension, instability, and unanswered questions. As Akhenaten's reign progressed, Egypt's foreign influence weakened, internal resistance grew, and records become increasingly fragmented, and then, quite suddenly, Nefertiti begins to vanish from history. Her name disappears from monuments, her images become rare, and scholars are left with one of the greatest mysteries of ancient Egypt: what happened to Nefertiti? Did she die suddenly, fall from political favor, or assume a new identity under a different royal name? Some historians believe she ruled briefly as a co-regent or even as a female pharaoh after Akhenaten's death, possibly under the name Nefertiti, while others argue that she was deliberately erased during the restoration of the old gods that followed, her memory condemned along with the Atenist experiment. The absence of her tomb, the lack of a confirmed mummy, and the deliberate destruction of Amarna period monuments only deepen the mystery, turning Nefertiti into a figure suspended between history and legend. What makes her story so powerful is not just what we know, but what we do not know, because her life reminds us that history is shaped by politics, belief, and memory, and that even the most powerful individuals can be silenced by time. In this series, we will dig deep into the world of ancient Egypt to uncover the political intrigue, religious conflict, artistic innovation, and personal drama that surrounded Nefertiti's life, separating evidence from theory while embracing the mystery that makes her story so compelling. So stay with me as we step back into the sunlit city of Amarna, walk through temples dedicated to a single blazing god, and follow the traces of a queen who may have ruled an empire, reshaped a religion, and then disappeared without a trace. This is the story of Nefertiti, the mysterious queen of Egypt, and this is just the beginning. Part 1 begins in a world where power flowed from the Nile like blood through the veins of Egypt, and where kings were seen as living gods whose authority was as eternal as the sun itself. Long before Nefertiti became a name whispered by historians and admired by millions, Egypt stood at the height of its imperial strength during the 18th dynasty, ruling vast territories and commanding wealth beyond imagination. It was into this world of ritual, hierarchy, and divine kingship that Nefertiti emerged, though her origins remain one of the earliest mysteries surrounding her life. Unlike many royal women whose family backgrounds are clearly recorded, Nefertiti appears suddenly in the historical record, fully formed as a great royal wife, leading scholars to debate whether she was of noble Egyptian blood, the daughter of a high-ranking official such as I, or perhaps even a foreign princess brought into Egypt through diplomatic marriage. This uncertainty only deepens her mystique, because from the moment she steps onto the stage of history, she does so with unusual confidence and prominence. As the wife of Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, Nefertiti quickly became more than a ceremonial partner, as early reliefs already show her participating in state rituals and religious ceremonies normally dominated by the pharaoh alone. Their marriage was not merely personal but ideological, forged in a shared vision that would soon reshape Egypt's spiritual and political identity. Amenhotep IV's gradual break from traditional religion marked the beginning of a seismic shift, as he challenged the powerful priesthood of Ammonius and redirected worship toward the Aten, the radiant solar disk that symbolized universal life. In this unfolding revolution, Nefertiti stood at the center, not as a silent supporter but as an essential pillar of the new order. Artistic depictions from the early Amarna period reveal her wearing elaborate crowns, sometimes even the blue Kepresh war crown, a symbol of royal authority, suggesting that her power was publicly acknowledged and carefully constructed. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti founded a new capital city, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, built in a remote stretch of desert and dedicated entirely to the worship of the Aten. This city was more than a political statement, it was a physical manifestation of their shared ideology, designed to break from the past and create a purified space where the new god could be worshipped without interference from old traditions. Within the open-air temples of Amarna, Nefertiti appears repeatedly offering sacrifices, raising her hands to the sun's rays, and standing beside the pharaoh as an equal participant in divine communication, reinforcing the idea that the royal couple together formed the bridge between the Aten and humanity. Their family life also became a public symbol of this new belief system, as scenes of the royal household, intimate and affectionate, replaced the distant, formal imagery of earlier dynasties. Nefertiti is shown playing with her 6 daughters, kissing them, and holding them on her lap, presenting a vision of kingship rooted in life, fertility, and sunlight, all blessings associated with the Aten. Yet beneath this idealized imagery lay growing tension, because Egypt's traditional religious institutions did not disappear quietly. The exclusion of old gods threatened the economic and political power of entrenched priesthoods, and resistance simmered beneath the surface. While Akhenaten is often portrayed as the sole architect of this radical transformation, the consistency and prominence of Nefertiti's presence suggest that she was deeply involved in shaping and sustaining the new ideology, possibly acting as a stabilizing force within the royal court. Her authority during this period appears to increase rather than diminish, and by the later years of Akhenaten's reign, her titles and representations hint at an elevation beyond that of a typical queen, raising the possibility that she may have served as co-regent, sharing power at a time when the kingdom faced internal and external challenges. Part 1 ends at this critical moment, with Nefertiti standing at the peak of her influence, the sun of the Aten blazing above the new city, and the future of Egypt hanging in a delicate balance, poised between revolutionary vision and impending collapse. Part 2 continues as the bright promise of the Amarna revolution begins to darken, revealing the fragile foundations beneath the radiant surface that Nefertiti and Akhenaten had so carefully constructed. By the middle years of Akhenaten's reign, Egypt was no longer the confident empire it once had been, as foreign territories in Syria and Canaan slipped from Egyptian control and desperate letters from vassal rulers, preserved in the Amarna letters, pleaded for military support that never arrived. While Akhenaten remained absorbed in religious devotion to the Aten, the burden of maintaining stability within the kingdom may have fallen increasingly upon Nefertiti, whose visibility in state art and inscriptions continued to grow even as the pharaoh himself became more isolated. During this period, Nefertiti's image undergoes a subtle but significant transformation, as she is depicted with more regal symbolism, stronger posture, and increasingly authoritative roles, reinforcing the idea that she was not only queen but an active ruler in her own right. Reliefs show her driving a chariot, striking enemies, and performing rituals previously reserved for kings, imagery that carried powerful political meaning in ancient Egypt, where visual symbolism was inseparable from authority. At the same time, the royal family faced profound personal loss, as several of Nefertiti's daughters appear to have died young, events that cast a shadow over the idealized scenes of family life and may have deepened the emotional and spiritual intensity of the Aten cult. As the old gods were erased from temples and their names chiseled away, resentment among the population likely grew, and the once celebrated city of Akhetaten became a symbol of division rather than unity. It is within this atmosphere of uncertainty that one of the greatest enigmas of Nefertiti's life emerges, as her name begins to disappear from the record, replaced by new royal names that blur the line between queen and king. Scholars have long debated whether Nefertiti adopted the throne name Nefertiti and ruled as a co-regent alongside Akhenaten or even as a sole ruler after his death, and while definitive proof remains elusive, the sudden prominence of this name, paired with royal epithets traditionally reserved for pharaohs, strongly suggests the presence of a female ruler wielding extraordinary power. If this was indeed Nefertiti, then her transformation from queen to king would represent one of the most dramatic shifts in female authority in ancient Egyptian history, rivaling even that of Hatshepsut. Such a move would not have been unprecedented, but it would have been politically risky, especially in a society already destabilized by religious upheaval. As Akhenaten's health declined and his reign drew toward an uncertain end, Egypt stood at a crossroads, caught between the Atenist experiment and the pull of ancient tradition, and in this moment, Nefertiti's role may have been to preserve continuity and protect the royal line. The appearance of the young Tutankhaten, later known as Tutankhamun, complicates this picture further, as he emerges as heir during a time of intense factional struggle within the court. Whether Nefertiti acted as regent for the boy king or was sidelined by powerful officials such as I and Horemheb remains one of the most contested questions in Egyptology. What is clear is that the ideological world Nefertiti helped build was beginning to collapse, and with it, the visibility of her power. Temples to the Aten were abandoned, the city of Amarna slowly emptied, and the old gods returned, welcomed back by a population eager for stability and familiarity. In the process of this restoration, the memory of the Amarna rulers was systematically attacked, their names erased and their monuments dismantled, as if the period itself were a dangerous mistake best forgotten. Nefertiti, once bathed in sunlight and central to divine imagery, was drawn into this deliberate silence, her legacy buried beneath layers of political condemnation. Part 2 closes in this shadowed transition, with Nefertiti's fate uncertain, her authority questioned, and her once radiant presence fading into obscurity, even as the echoes of her power continued to shape the turbulent years that followed. Part 3 enters the long silence that follows the fall of the Amarna age, a silence that surrounds Nefertiti more completely than almost any other royal figure in ancient Egypt, turning her final years and ultimate fate into one of history's most enduring mysteries. After the death of Akhenaten, the fragile Atenist system unraveled with remarkable speed, as the court abandoned the desert capital of Akhetaten and returned to the ancient religious centers along the Nile. In this rapid restoration of tradition, the young king Tutankhaten changed his name to Tutankhamun, signaling the return of Ammonius and the old gods, while officials worked tirelessly to erase the ideological scars left by the previous reign. Within this political and religious reversal, Nefertiti vanishes almost entirely from the record, her disappearance so complete that it feels intentional, as if silence itself were used as a weapon against her memory. Whether she died shortly before Akhenaten, ruled briefly under another name, or lived on into the early years of the restoration remains unknown, and each possibility carries profound implications for how we understand female power in ancient Egypt. If Nefertiti did rule as Nefertiti, then her reign was likely short and deeply contested, caught between loyalty to the Aten and the necessity of compromise with powerful traditionalists who demanded change. Such a ruler would have walked a dangerous path, balancing ideological conviction against political survival, and it is possible that this tension led to her removal from power, either through quiet displacement or deliberate erasure. The absence of a confirmed tomb only deepens the mystery, because burial was central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife, and the lack of clear funerary evidence suggests disruption, secrecy, or posthumous punishment. Numerous theories have emerged over the decades, proposing that Nefertiti's mummy may lie unidentified among known remains, or that she was buried hastily in a royal tomb later reused or altered, her identity deliberately obscured to prevent her from achieving eternal remembrance. Yet even as her physical presence disappeared, Nefertiti's image survived in unexpected ways, most famously through the discovery of her painted bust in the early 20th century, which reintroduced her to the modern world not as a controversial political figure but as an icon of beauty and elegance. This single artifact reshaped global perception, reducing a complex ruler and religious revolutionary into a timeless symbol of aesthetic perfection, while the deeper truths of her life remained buried beneath layers of myth and admiration. Modern Egyptology has since worked to reclaim Nefertiti as more than a beautiful face, examining inscriptions, art, and political context to understand the true extent of her authority and influence. Scholars now increasingly recognize that her prominence was not accidental or merely symbolic, but the result of deliberate political strategy within a radical ideological movement. Her partnership with Akhenaten represented a unique moment in Egyptian history when royal power was shared openly, visually, and perhaps structurally between husband and wife. This partnership, however, made her especially vulnerable when the movement collapsed, because she was inseparable from the ideology that later generations sought to destroy. In this sense, Nefertiti's erasure was not just personal but symbolic, an attempt to cleanse Egypt of a period seen as heretical and dangerous. Yet history has a way of resisting silence, and the very gaps in Nefertiti's story have fueled centuries of fascination, debate, and reinterpretation. She stands today as a reminder that power does not always leave clear footprints, especially when it challenges established order, and that women who step beyond traditional boundaries are often remembered through fragments rather than full narratives. Part 3 concludes not with certainty, but with reflection, as Nefertiti emerges from the shadows as a figure defined by both presence and absence, a queen whose influence shaped an age, whose disappearance reshaped memory, and whose mystery continues to invite us to question how history is written, erased, and rediscovered. Part 4 turns from the ancient past to the long afterlife of Nefertiti's legacy, tracing how a queen nearly erased from her own civilization came to dominate the modern imagination more powerfully than many rulers whose histories are far better documented. For centuries after the fall of the Amarna period, Nefertiti existed only as a faint echo within damaged reliefs and scattered inscriptions, her name rarely spoken and her deeds deliberately buried beneath layers of religious and political condemnation. Ancient Egyptian scribes, loyal to the restored order, had no interest in preserving the memory of a woman so closely tied to a heretical experiment, and as a result, later generations within Egypt itself knew almost nothing of her existence. It was only with the rise of modern archaeology that Nefertiti began her second life, not as a ruler or revolutionary, but as an object of wonder shaped by foreign eyes and modern ideals. The discovery of her painted bust in 1912 by a German excavation team transformed her overnight into a global icon, an image reproduced endlessly in books, museums, and popular culture, often stripped of historical context and elevated as the ultimate symbol of ancient beauty. This sudden fame created a powerful contradiction, because the world came to recognize Nefertiti's face long before it understood her story, celebrating her elegance while overlooking the political courage and ideological risk that defined her life. As scholars returned to the fragmented evidence of the Amarna period, a more complex portrait began to emerge, revealing Nefertiti as a woman who navigated unprecedented authority in a rigidly structured society, using religious reform, artistic innovation, and public imagery to reshape the meaning of queenship itself. Modern debates about her possible reign as pharaoh reflect broader questions about how history records female power, especially when it disrupts established norms. Unlike male rulers, whose failures are often documented alongside their successes, women like Nefertiti were more easily erased when their rule became inconvenient, their memory sacrificed to restore ideological stability. This selective remembrance has made Nefertiti a powerful symbol in contemporary discussions about gender, authority, and historical bias, as each new theory about her fate forces scholars to confront the limits of evidence shaped by ancient politics. Beyond academia, Nefertiti has inspired artists, writers, filmmakers, and political thinkers, who see in her story a timeless narrative of ambition, transformation, and disappearance. She is portrayed alternately as a devoted queen, a religious fanatic, a visionary reformer, or a tragic figure undone by forces larger than herself, and each interpretation reveals as much about modern values as it does about ancient Egypt. Her legacy has also sparked ethical debates surrounding cultural heritage, particularly concerning the location of her bust and the broader question of who has the right to possess and interpret the artifacts of the past. In this way, Nefertiti's influence extends far beyond her lifetime, shaping conversations about identity, ownership, and the global legacy of ancient civilizations. What makes her enduring presence so remarkable is that it rests on absence rather than abundance, on unanswered questions rather than definitive answers, allowing each generation to rediscover her anew. Nefertiti survives not because history preserved her carefully, but because it failed to silence her completely, leaving behind just enough traces to ignite curiosity and imagination. As this series reaches its conclusion, Nefertiti stands not only as the mysterious queen of Egypt, but as a symbol of how power, memory, and identity intersect across time, reminding us that history is not a fixed record, but a living dialogue between the past and the present, shaped by what is remembered, what is forgotten, and what we continue to seek in the shadows. Part 5 brings the story of Nefertiti to a reflective close by drawing together history, mystery, and meaning, revealing why her name continues to resonate so powerfully in the modern world despite the silence that once surrounded it. At the heart of Nefertiti's story lies a paradox that defines many transformative figures in history. She was both immensely visible in her own time and deliberately obscured by those who came after her. During the height of the Amarna period, Nefertiti stood in the full light of the Aten, her image carved into temple walls, her authority displayed through ritual, regalia, and posture traditionally reserved for kings. Yet when the ideological experiment she helped shape collapsed, her memory was drawn into shadow, her name erased as Egypt sought stability in the familiar embrace of its ancient gods. This act of erasure, however, did not destroy her legacy. Instead, it transformed it, turning Nefertiti into a symbol of resistance against forgetting and a reminder of how power challenges the boundaries of remembrance. As historians continue to study the Amarna period, Nefertiti increasingly emerges not as a passive figure carried by Akhenaten's ambitions, but as an active architect of change, a woman who understood the language of imagery, ritual, and belief and used it to redefine queenship itself. Her partnership with Akhenaten was radical not simply because of religious reform, but because it presented a shared model of authority that disrupted deeply entrenched hierarchies. In a civilization where the pharaoh embodied divine order, Nefertiti's equal presence suggested a deliberate reimagining of power, one that placed balance, family, and visibility at its core. Even if she ruled briefly under another name or served as regent during a moment of transition, the very possibility of her sovereignty challenges long-held assumptions about the limits of female authority in the ancient world. The uncertainty surrounding her death and burial remains one of the most compelling aspects of her story, because it exposes the fragility of historical memory itself. In a culture obsessed with eternity and the afterlife, to be denied a clear tomb or lasting commemoration was a profound punishment, one that sought to sever the individual from both divine favor and human remembrance. Yet in Nefertiti's case, this punishment failed, because fragments endured, art survived, and curiosity outlived condemnation. The rediscovery of her image in the modern era restored her presence, not as a footnote, but as a central figure whose life invites endless reinterpretation. Today, Nefertiti occupies a unique place between scholarship and imagination, standing at the crossroads of evidence and myth. She is studied in academic journals, debated in museums, and celebrated in popular culture, each space contributing a different layer to her identity. This multiplicity does not weaken her story, it strengthens it, because it reflects the complexity of a woman who lived at the center of upheaval and refused to fit neatly into prescribed roles. Nefertiti's enduring appeal lies in her ambiguity, in the way her story resists closure and demands engagement rather than passive consumption. Through her, we are reminded that history is not merely a sequence of events, but a process of interpretation shaped by power, belief, and survival. As this series concludes, Nefertiti stands not simply as the mysterious queen of Egypt, but as a mirror reflecting our own questions about leadership, faith, gender, and memory. Her life encourages us to look beyond monuments and masterpieces, to listen to what is missing as carefully as to what remains, and to recognize that sometimes the most powerful voices in history are those that were nearly silenced. In the end, Nefertiti does not offer us certainty, but something far more enduring, the invitation to keep searching, to keep questioning, and to keep the dialogue between past and present alive beneath the eternal sun of Egypt. Part 6 moves beyond the boundaries of traditional history and enters the realm of interpretation, influence, and unanswered possibility, exploring how Nefertiti's story continues to evolve as new questions are asked and new perspectives are applied to the ancient past. Even after decades of archaeological research, scholarly debate, and technological advancement, Nefertiti refuses to settle into a single, fixed identity, and this refusal is precisely what keeps her alive in historical discourse. Each generation of historians approaches her life differently, shaped by changing attitudes toward power, religion, and gender, and as a result, Nefertiti is constantly being rediscovered rather than simply re-examined. Modern scientific techniques, including DNA analysis, CT scanning of royal mummies, and digital reconstruction of damaged inscriptions, have opened new doors while simultaneously reminding us of the limits of certainty. Every potential breakthrough brings with it new complications, as evidence rarely speaks clearly when it has been filtered through ancient political agendas and later destruction. The question of Nefertiti's mummy remains one of the most tantalizing puzzles, with several unidentified royal remains proposed as candidates, yet none confirmed beyond doubt, leaving her physical fate suspended between hypothesis and hope. This uncertainty forces us to confront a deeper truth about ancient history, that power does not guarantee permanence, and that even those closest to the throne can be lost to time when their legacy becomes inconvenient. Beyond the physical search, Nefertiti's influence can be traced in the subtle ways later Egyptian queens were represented, as if her brief moment of visibility cracked open possibilities that never fully closed again. While no later queen repeated the exact model of authority she embodied, echoes of her prominence can be felt in the increased ceremonial presence of royal women and in the memory of female rulership as a viable, if rare, option in moments of crisis. In this sense, Nefertiti became a silent reference point, an unspoken precedent that lingered beneath the surface of royal ideology. In the modern world, her story has taken on new meanings far removed from the political struggles of the Amarna court, becoming a symbol through which people explore identity, autonomy, and the cost of transformation. For some, she represents the courage to challenge tradition; for others, she embodies the danger of radical change imposed from above. Artists reinterpret her image to question beauty standards, filmmakers use her mystery to craft narratives of intrigue, and writers return to her silence as a space where imagination and history intersect. These reinventions are not distortions but extensions of her legacy, because they reflect the same tension between visibility and erasure that defined her life. Nefertiti's enduring relevance also raises ethical and philosophical questions about how we engage with the past, particularly when artifacts are removed from their original cultural context and transformed into global icons. The debates surrounding the ownership, display, and interpretation of her image highlight the unequal power dynamics that continue to shape historical narratives, reminding us that history is never neutral and that the past is often curated through the lens of the present. Through Nefertiti, we are invited to ask not only who she was, but who gets to tell her story, and why certain versions are elevated while others are ignored. As scholarship advances, it becomes increasingly clear that Nefertiti cannot be understood in isolation, because her life was deeply entangled with a moment of unprecedented experimentation in religion, art, and governance. She was both a product of her time and a force that reshaped it, and this duality resists simple categorization. Rather than seeking a definitive conclusion to her story, Part 6 embraces the idea that Nefertiti's power lies in her openness, in the way her fragmented legacy encourages dialogue rather than closure. She stands as a reminder that history is not a finished book, but an ongoing conversation, shaped by new evidence, new values, and new voices. As long as questions remain about her fate, her authority, and her intentions, Nefertiti will continue to occupy a unique space between fact and possibility, where curiosity thrives and certainty fades. In this final reflection, she emerges not merely as the mysterious Queen of Egypt, but as a timeless figure who challenges us to rethink how we remember, interpret, and give meaning to the past, ensuring that her presence, though once nearly erased, will continue to endure in thought, debate, and imagination. Part 7 turns inward, examining the human dimension behind the titles, crowns, and controversies, seeking to understand Nefertiti not only as a symbol of power and mystery but as a woman navigating an extraordinary and perilous life within the rigid framework of ancient Egyptian royalty. Stripped of the monumental reliefs and ideological battles, Nefertiti's story is also one of personal agency, emotional endurance, and adaptation in a world where royal women were expected to embody perfection while remaining bound by tradition. From the earliest depictions, her confidence and composure suggest a figure carefully trained to perform authority, aware that visibility itself was a political tool. Living at the heart of the royal court meant constant scrutiny, ceremonial obligation, and the pressure to produce heirs who would secure dynastic continuity. Nefertiti bore 6 daughters, a fact that may have strengthened her bond with Akhenaten but also exposed her to the vulnerability inherent in a system that privileged male succession. In a society where motherhood was sacred yet politically charged, her role as both queen and mother merged into a single public identity, displayed repeatedly in art that emphasized fertility, affection, and divine favor. These intimate scenes, so unusual in Egyptian royal tradition, hint at a conscious effort to humanize kingship, presenting the royal family as the living embodiment of Aten's life-giving power. Yet behind this idealized imagery likely lay moments of fear and uncertainty, especially as the political climate grew increasingly hostile and the old religious order pushed back against the Atenist vision. Nefertiti's emotional world is largely inaccessible to us, but the scale of loss she endured, including the apparent deaths of several daughters, suggests a life marked by grief as well as grandeur. In ancient Egypt, death was both a personal tragedy and a cosmic disruption, and such losses may have deepened her commitment to a belief system that promised renewal through light and life. As tensions mounted and the future of the Amarna experiment became uncertain, Nefertiti would have been forced to make difficult choices, balancing loyalty to ideology with the survival of her family and legacy. If she did assume a co-regency or rule independently, that decision would have required not only political skill but immense personal resolve, stepping into a role that challenged centuries of tradition and invited resistance from powerful elites. Even if she did not formally rule as pharaoh, her sustained prominence during a collapsing regime suggests a woman capable of adapting to rapidly shifting realities, using symbolism, ritual, and presence to maintain influence in an unstable world. Part 7 also invites reflection on the psychological cost of erasure, imagining the impact of watching one's life's work dismantled, one's beliefs condemned, and one's memory targeted for destruction. In a culture where remembrance ensured eternal life, the threat of being forgotten was more terrifying than death itself, and Nefertiti's disappearance from the record may represent one of the most profound punishments inflicted by history. Yet even this attempted annihilation speaks to the perceived danger of her influence, because only figures of real power required such thorough silencing. In this light, Nefertiti emerges not as a victim of circumstance, but as a figure whose strength made her threatening long after her physical presence was gone. Her humanity, inferred through art and absence rather than words, adds depth to her mystery, reminding us that history often preserves the actions of rulers while erasing their inner lives. Part 7 closes by recognizing that Nefertiti's enduring fascination lies not only in unanswered questions about her fate, but in the emotional resonance of her story, which bridges the gap between ancient experience and modern empathy. She becomes a figure through whom we can explore ambition and devotion, loss and resilience, visibility and silence, making her not just a queen of Egypt, but a profoundly human presence whose life continues to speak through the spaces history left behind. Part 8 expands the lens to consider Nefertiti's place within the broader currents of world history, exploring how her life and the Amarna revolution represent one of the earliest and most radical experiments in ideological transformation ever attempted by a state. Long before later civilizations grappled with questions of religious exclusivity, centralized belief, and the relationship between spiritual truth and political authority, Nefertiti and Akhenaten stood at the center of an audacious attempt to redefine the divine order itself. This was not a quiet philosophical shift but a dramatic restructuring of public life, art, ritual, and governance, in which Nefertiti played a visible and essential role. Her presence in state imagery was not decorative, it was a deliberate assertion that belief and power were embodied through the royal family, with the queen acting as a vital conduit between the Aten and the people. Seen in this light, Nefertiti's significance extends far beyond Egypt, because the Amarna period offers a rare case study in how belief systems can be imposed, resisted, and ultimately reversed. The failure of this experiment highlights the limits of ideological change when it is driven from the top without broad social consensus, a lesson echoed repeatedly throughout human history. Nefertiti's fate becomes inseparable from this broader pattern, as her disappearance mirrors the collapse of the system she helped uphold. When the old gods returned, there was no place for a queen whose authority had been defined by a rejected vision of the universe. Yet even in failure, the Amarna revolution left lasting marks, particularly in the realm of artistic expression, where the emphasis on individuality, intimacy, and realism would influence Egyptian art long after Atenism itself had vanished. Nefertiti's image stands at the center of this legacy, representing a moment when art became a vehicle for ideology and personal identity rather than mere tradition. From a comparative perspective, Nefertiti can be seen alongside other transformative figures who challenged religious and political norms, individuals whose influence was magnified precisely because it provoked resistance. Like them, she occupies a liminal space between reformer and heretic, visionary and disruptor, her reputation shaped as much by opposition as by achievement. This ambiguity complicates modern attempts to categorize her, forcing us to confront the complexity of historical change itself. Part 8 also considers how Nefertiti's story resonates in contemporary global culture, where debates about belief, authority, and representation remain deeply relevant. Her life invites parallels with modern discussions about the role of women in leadership, the use of imagery to construct political narratives, and the fragility of reform in the face of entrenched power structures. In this sense, Nefertiti becomes a bridge between ancient and modern worlds, her experiences offering insight into enduring human struggles rather than distant curiosities. The global fascination with her image reflects a desire to connect with a past that feels both familiar and profoundly alien, a reminder that the questions faced by ancient societies are often the same ones we continue to ask today. By situating Nefertiti within a wider historical and cultural framework, Part 8 emphasizes that her importance does not rest solely on unresolved mysteries about her death or reign, but on the broader implications of her life and the era she helped define. She represents the potential and peril of radical change, the power of symbolism, and the vulnerability of memory in the face of political necessity. As the series moves toward its final reflections, Nefertiti emerges not just as the mysterious queen of Egypt, but as a figure whose story illuminates the dynamics of belief and power that have shaped civilizations across time, ensuring that her legacy continues to inform, challenge, and inspire far beyond the banks of the Nile. Part 9 approaches the end of the journey by confronting the limits of knowledge itself, using Nefertiti's story as a lens through which to examine how history is constructed, fragmented, and ultimately imagined. By this stage, it becomes clear that the mystery surrounding Nefertiti is not simply the result of missing evidence, but the product of deliberate choices made by ancient authorities who controlled what was recorded and what was destroyed. Her disappearance from the historical record forces us to question the reliability of official narratives, especially in societies where political legitimacy depended on divine sanction and ideological continuity. In erasing Nefertiti, the restorers of traditional religion were not merely punishing a single figure, but rewriting the past to stabilize the present, a practice that continues in various forms even today. This realization transforms Nefertiti from a passive subject of mystery into an active challenge to the way we understand history itself. The gaps in her story invite speculation, but they also demand humility, reminding us that certainty is often an illusion created by surviving texts rather than a reflection of full truth. Modern scholarship has increasingly shifted away from seeking a single definitive answer about Nefertiti's fate and toward embracing a range of plausible scenarios, each supported by fragments of evidence and contextual logic. This methodological shift reflects a broader change in historical thinking, one that values transparency about uncertainty over the false comfort of simple conclusions. Through this lens, Nefertiti becomes a case study in responsible interpretation, teaching us how to balance imagination with evidence and how to respect the silence of the past without surrendering to it completely. Part 9 also explores the role of the audience in shaping Nefertiti's legacy, recognizing that fascination itself is a powerful force in preserving memory. The continued interest in her life ensures that research, debate, and reinterpretation never fully stop, allowing her presence to endure even in the absence of definitive answers. In this way, Nefertiti's story demonstrates that history is not a static archive but a dynamic relationship between past and present, sustained by curiosity and meaning-making. Her image, so widely reproduced and admired, functions as a visual anchor for this relationship, drawing people into deeper engagement with the complexities of ancient Egypt and the realities of ideological change. Part 9 further reflects on how Nefertiti's narrative challenges modern assumptions about progress and permanence, showing that even the most ambitious reforms can vanish rapidly when social support collapses. The Amarna experiment, once envisioned as a new cosmic order, survived for barely a generation, yet its impact continues to ripple through history precisely because of its failure. Nefertiti's life, intertwined with this experiment, illustrates how influence is not measured solely by longevity but by the intensity with which it disrupts established patterns. As the series nears its conclusion, Part 9 emphasizes that the true power of Nefertiti's story lies not in solving the mystery, but in engaging with it thoughtfully. Her legacy encourages us to approach the past with curiosity tempered by caution, to acknowledge the voices that were silenced, and to recognize that what survives is often shaped by conflict rather than consensus. In standing at the edge of what can be known, Nefertiti reminds us that history is as much about asking meaningful questions as it is about finding answers, and that the spaces between facts can be just as revealing as the facts themselves. Part 10 brings the series to its final horizon, gathering every thread of Nefertiti's life, absence, and meaning into a single reflection on why her story refuses to end, even after more than 3,000 years. At the conclusion of this journey, Nefertiti no longer stands only as a queen of ancient Egypt, but as a powerful reminder of how history is shaped by courage, conflict, and consequence. Her rise during the Amarna period shows us a woman who stood at the heart of an unprecedented experiment, one that dared to redefine divine truth, political authority, and the visibility of royal women in a civilization built on tradition. She was not a background figure illuminated by Akhenaten's ambitions, but a central presence whose image, titles, and actions reveal deliberate authority and conscious participation in reshaping the world around her. Whether as queen, co-regent, or possible pharaoh, Nefertiti occupied a space that challenged expectations, and it was this challenge that ultimately placed her legacy in danger. When the Aten faded and the old gods returned, Egypt sought healing through erasure, and Nefertiti became one of its most carefully silenced memories, not because she lacked importance, but because she represented a truth the new order could not afford to remember. Yet the attempt to erase her did not succeed, because fragments survived, art endured, and silence itself became a source of fascination. In the modern world, Nefertiti re-emerged not through texts that explained her life, but through an image that demanded attention, inviting questions rather than providing answers. That imbalance between visibility and knowledge defines her enduring power, because it forces each generation to engage actively with her story instead of passively consuming it. Nefertiti teaches us that history is not only written by victors, but also haunted by those they tried to forget, and that memory has a way of resurfacing when it carries unresolved meaning. Her life encourages us to reconsider how authority is portrayed, how belief systems rise and fall, and how women's power is recorded, distorted, or denied within historical narratives. At the same time, her mystery warns us against the desire for absolute certainty, reminding us that some truths remain inaccessible not because they lack importance, but because they were deliberately obscured. In accepting this uncertainty, we gain something deeper than answers: perspective. Nefertiti becomes a bridge between ancient and modern thought, connecting questions of faith, leadership, gender, and remembrance that continue to shape societies today. Her story does not resolve neatly, and that is precisely why it endures, because it reflects the complexity of human ambition and the fragile nature of legacy. As this series ends, Nefertiti remains where she has always been, standing beneath the eternal Egyptian sun, poised between light and shadow, presence and absence, history and imagination. She does not demand that we solve her mystery, only that we continue to look, question, and listen. In doing so, we honor not only the queen she may have been, but the enduring human need to understand the past, even when it refuses to fully reveal itself. Part 11 revisits the story from a different angle, not to extend the timeline of Nefertiti's life, but to deepen our understanding of why her mystery continues to command such emotional and intellectual power long after her era has vanished. By this point, it becomes clear that Nefertiti's significance is not confined to what she did, but to what her story represents within the broader human struggle between change and continuity. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with order, balance, and eternal repetition, and within that worldview, the Amarna period stood out as a dangerous anomaly, a moment when cosmic balance itself seemed to waver. Nefertiti, as one of the most visible faces of that anomaly, became inseparable from both its promise and its perceived failure. Her disappearance from official memory was not simply political housekeeping, but a symbolic act aimed at restoring cosmic harmony by denying legitimacy to a time that had threatened it. Understanding this helps explain why her erasure was so thorough and why the silence surrounding her feels almost intentional rather than accidental. In this sense, Nefertiti was not forgotten because she was insignificant, but because she was too significant, embodying a rupture that later generations feared might reopen if remembered too clearly. From a psychological perspective, her story highlights how societies cope with traumatic or destabilizing change, often by rewriting the past into a more comforting narrative. By removing Nefertiti and the Atenist experiment from collective memory, Egypt attempted to heal itself, even at the cost of historical truth. Yet that suppression also created the conditions for her eventual return, because what is buried without resolution tends to resurface in unexpected ways. When modern archaeology rediscovered traces of the Amarna period, it did more than uncover artifacts, it reopened a conversation that ancient Egypt had deliberately closed. Nefertiti's re-emergence in the modern imagination thus mirrors the return of repressed memory, confronting us with questions that resist easy answers. She forces us to ask whether stability is worth the cost of silencing innovation, and whether radical ideas must always fail to preserve social order. Her story also complicates modern narratives about progress, reminding us that not all change moves forward in a straight line and that some experiments, even when unsuccessful, leave lasting intellectual and cultural imprints. In this light, Nefertiti's legacy is not diminished by the collapse of the Amarna system, it is defined by it. She becomes a symbol of transitional moments, those brief windows when alternative futures seem possible before being closed by political reality. This perspective also reframes her beauty, often emphasized in popular culture, as secondary to her symbolic weight. The famous bust captures attention because it humanizes the past, but it is the unresolved tension behind her gaze that sustains fascination. She looks neither victorious nor defeated, neither fully present nor entirely gone, embodying the ambiguity that defines her life. Part 11 emphasizes that this ambiguity is not a flaw in historical understanding but a feature of it, revealing how meaning often emerges from uncertainty rather than resolution. Nefertiti's story reminds us that history is not merely about reconstructing events, but about interpreting absence, silence, and intention. Each unanswered question becomes a space for reflection, allowing her narrative to adapt to new generations and new concerns. As long as societies wrestle with the balance between tradition and transformation, authority and belief, visibility and erasure, Nefertiti will remain relevant, not as a solved puzzle, but as a living symbol of those struggles. In this way, Part 11 affirms that the enduring power of Nefertiti lies not in adding new facts to her biography, but in recognizing how her fragmented story continues to illuminate the human condition, ensuring that her presence endures not only in history, but in thought itself. Part 12 deepens the exploration of Nefertiti's enduring influence, shifting focus from the historical record to the ways in which her life and image have become a cultural and intellectual touchstone across millennia, demonstrating that the impact of a ruler is measured as much by the questions they leave behind as by the actions they take. While the tangible traces of her life, the inscriptions, reliefs, and the famous bust, offer only fragments of a full story, the gaps themselves have created a canvas upon which imagination, scholarship, and culture continue to project meaning. Nefertiti's story is a testament to the complex interplay between visibility and power. She was highly visible in her time, participating directly in religious rituals, political representation, and artistic innovation, yet later generations worked tirelessly to remove her from the narrative, creating an almost paradoxical duality in which her absence amplified her presence. This duality is central to understanding why she captivates both scholars and the public today. In a modern context, Nefertiti has become a symbol for questions about female leadership and the resilience of influence in the face of erasure. Unlike many historical queens whose roles were strictly ceremonial or confined to private life, Nefertiti's authority appears to have been both public and performative, her very image functioning as a political instrument within the revolutionary vision of Akhenaten's court. Whether she ruled briefly under another name, served as co-regent, or acted as the guiding force behind the Atenist ideology, the possibility of such unprecedented female power challenges modern assumptions about gender, hierarchy, and historical precedent, reminding us that women have long shaped the trajectory of civilizations even when records deny their presence. The fascination with Nefertiti also reveals the ways in which human memory and history interact. Her disappearance, deliberate or otherwise, created a vacuum that later centuries could not ignore, compelling archaeologists, historians, and artists to fill it with interpretation, speculation, and reconstruction. In this sense, her legacy is a mirror reflecting our own desire for understanding, our need to find narrative coherence even where evidence is incomplete. Art, literature, and film have magnified this effect, transforming Nefertiti into both a historical figure and a mythic presence whose story is continually reimagined to resonate with contemporary values and questions. Beyond cultural resonance, her life underscores profound lessons about the fragility and resilience of social systems. The Amarna period, which she shaped alongside Akhenaten, demonstrates how radical innovation can simultaneously inspire awe and provoke backlash, how concentrated authority can achieve remarkable visibility but remain vulnerable to ideological reversal, and how symbols, whether images, rituals, or titles, carry enduring power beyond the lifespan of those who create them. Nefertiti's erasure after the fall of Atenism was not merely a personal tragedy, it was a deliberate political and religious act aimed at reasserting stability and continuity in the face of what the establishment viewed as dangerous experimentation. Yet even that attempt at obliteration failed to prevent her from re-emerging centuries later as a figure of fascination, proving that influence is not always measured by immediacy or duration, but by the capacity to endure, inspire, and provoke inquiry across time. Part 12 emphasizes that Nefertiti's power lies precisely in her liminality. She is neither fully present in the historical record nor entirely absent, and it is within this tension that her story continues to generate insight and inspiration. Her life encourages reflection not only on the mechanisms of political authority and religious transformation, but also on the ways human memory operates, how cultural artifacts gain meaning, and how stories are reshaped across generations. In considering Nefertiti, we are invited to explore the intersections of identity, memory, and legacy, to recognize the costs of power and the fragility of human achievement, and to appreciate the enduring potential of a single figure to transcend the limitations of time, culture, and narrative. By the end of Part 12, it becomes evident that Nefertiti is not simply a subject of history, but a living conduit for understanding how the past continues to shape, challenge, and illuminate the present, ensuring that her presence, though partially hidden, remains unbroken across millennia. Part 13 turns to the broader implications of Nefertiti's life and legacy, examining how her story continues to influence our understanding of power, gender, and cultural memory, and how it invites reflection on the ways societies construct, suppress, and reclaim their pasts. Nefertiti's prominence in the Amarna period represents one of the clearest examples in ancient history of a woman navigating the highest levels of authority, operating within a system dominated by tradition while simultaneously participating in radical transformation. Her image, depicted in temple reliefs, statues, and ritual scenes, projects a sense of composure, control, and collaboration with Akhenaten that transcends conventional representations of queenship, suggesting a deliberate assertion of political and religious significance. Yet the dramatic erasure of her name and memory after the collapse of the Eight-Nist experiment illustrates the fragility of power, particularly for women whose authority threatened established norms. Nefertiti's disappearance was not merely a historical accident but a calculated effort to restore ideological stability, and in that act of erasure lies a deeper commentary on the intersection of politics, religion, and memory. The very absence that once silenced her now amplifies her mystique, making her one of the most compelling figures of ancient Egypt and ensuring that her story continues to spark inquiry, debate, and imagination across disciplines. Scholars debate the exact nature of her role in the later years of the Amarna period, whether she assumed co-regency, ruled as Nefertiti, or guided her successors behind the scenes, and each hypothesis underscores her capacity to wield influence in a society that offered few formal avenues for female leadership. These discussions illuminate larger questions about how historians reconstruct the past when evidence is incomplete, damaged, or deliberately obscured, and they challenge assumptions about authority, succession, and historical visibility. Beyond scholarly inquiry, Nefertiti's story resonates culturally, inspiring art, literature, and popular imagination, where she is simultaneously celebrated as an icon of beauty, a figure of tragic intrigue, and a symbol of intellectual and spiritual power. The enduring fascination with her image, the famous bust in particular, reflects not only aesthetic admiration but also a recognition of her presence in shaping history, a presence that defies complete erasure. Her legacy also demonstrates the power of narrative absence. In the spaces left by destroyed inscriptions and abandoned monuments, curiosity and speculation flourish, allowing each generation to reinterpret her significance and find new meaning in her life. Nefertiti's experience offers insight into the dynamics of radical change, illustrating how religious and political revolutions, no matter how innovative or ambitious, must contend with entrenched cultural forces and social expectations. The rise and fall of the Eight-Nist period underscores the tension between innovation and tradition, and Nefertiti's role exemplifies the potential and peril of centralized authority embodied in a single individual, particularly a woman whose presence challenged established hierarchies. Part 13 also emphasizes the ways in which memory and legacy are constructed. Power is not only exerted through deeds but through how those deeds are remembered, preserved, or erased, and Nefertiti's partial invisibility teaches modern audiences to read history critically, to question official narratives, and to value both what survives and what is lost. Her life, therefore, functions as both a historical case study and a lens through which to examine timeless human concerns, ambition, resilience, innovation, and the precariousness of influence. In concluding this reflection, Nefertiti emerges as a figure defined by both action and absence, a woman whose authority shaped a transformative era and whose memory continues to inspire inquiry, imagination, and admiration. She is at once a historical subject and a symbol, illustrating how legacy endures not only in what is recorded, but in what is sought, questioned, and remembered, ensuring that her story remains alive across millennia as a testament to human curiosity, power, and the enduring allure of mystery. Part 14 continues the exploration of Nefertiti's life and legacy by examining the ways in which her story embodies the tensions between innovation and tradition, visibility and erasure, power and vulnerability, revealing why she remains one of the most compelling figures of ancient Egypt and why her influence continues to reverberate in modern consciousness. During the height of the Amarna period, Nefertiti's prominence in religious, artistic, and political spheres reflected a radical restructuring of Egyptian society, one in which the traditional hierarchy of gods, priests, and pharaohs was temporarily supplanted by a new theology centered on the Aten, the sun disk, and a royal family whose authority was made visible in unprecedented ways. Her presence in temple reliefs, domestic scenes, and monumental art demonstrated not only aesthetic mastery but also political acumen, conveying messages of collaboration, devotion, and legitimacy that were intended to reinforce the transformative vision of Akhenaten's reign. In these depictions, Nefertiti was more than a supportive consort. She functioned as a partner in governance, a religious intermediary, and a visible embodiment of divine favor, suggesting that her influence was both practical and symbolic, extending into areas of decision-making, ritual innovation, and the very shaping of Egyptian ideology. Yet the very visibility that marked her power also made her vulnerable, for when the Amarna revolution failed and the traditional priesthood and political institutions reasserted control, Nefertiti became a target for erasure, her name removed from monuments, her achievements marginalized, and her place in history intentionally obscured. This paradox, being central to an extraordinary experiment yet rendered almost invisible in its aftermath, is fundamental to understanding why Nefertiti captivates historians, archaeologists, and the public alike. Her life exemplifies the fragility of memory, the volatility of power, and the ways in which cultural narratives are constructed and manipulated. Modern fascination with Nefertiti has been fueled not only by the enigmatic circumstances of her disappearance but also by the remarkable survival of her image, particularly the iconic painted bust discovered in the early 20th century. This artifact captures her likeness with such clarity, elegance, and emotional resonance that it has transcended historical scholarship to become a global symbol of beauty, intellect, and enigmatic authority. Yet the bust is more than a portrait, it is a portal into questions about representation, perception, and the intersection of art and power, inviting viewers to consider not only who Nefertiti was, but how and why her image was constructed to convey authority, legitimacy, and divinity. The continued study of Nefertiti has prompted reassessment of female agency in ancient Egypt, highlighting how queens could wield influence both publicly and privately, shaping political outcomes, religious practice, and even the succession of power. Whether or not Nefertiti ruled as Nefertiti or acted as co-regent, the possibility itself underscores a profound lesson, that authority and impact are not always measured by titles alone, but by the ways in which individuals navigate the structures around them, negotiate visibility, and leave traces of influence that persist even when written records are incomplete. Part 14 also emphasizes the broader cultural and philosophical significance of her story, suggesting that Nefertiti's life illustrates the complex interplay between human ambition, ideological innovation, and societal reaction, showing how transformative efforts are often met with both awe and resistance, success and erasure. Her disappearance from history, far from diminishing her legacy, magnifies it, because it transforms absence into intrigue and speculation into engagement, compelling generations to piece together a life that was deliberately fragmented. In this sense, Nefertiti's story is not simply about ancient Egypt, it is a meditation on the nature of power, memory, and human curiosity, a demonstration of how influence can endure through silence as effectively as through documentation. As Part 14 closes, Nefertiti emerges as a figure who defies simple categorization. She is queen, revolutionary, icon, and enigma all at once, embodying the tensions that define not only her own era but the human experience across time. Her legacy is both historical and symbolic, reminding us that authority can be both fleeting and enduring, that erasure can amplify presence, and that the most compelling stories often reside at the intersection of fact, interpretation, and imagination, ensuring that Nefertiti's place in history, and in our collective consciousness, remains as powerful and mysterious as it has ever been. Part 15 moves to a reflective and integrative perspective, exploring how Nefertiti's story functions not only as history but as a lens through which we can understand the interplay between ambition, identity, and memory, showing why her life continues to resonate centuries after she walked the sands of Egypt. Nefertiti existed at the intersection of radical religious transformation and political innovation, a period in which the traditional structures of pharaonic power were challenged by an unprecedented devotion to the Aten, the sun disk, and by the deliberate elevation of the royal family as mediators between the divine and the mortal. In this context, Nefertiti's role was extraordinary. She was a figure of public authority, ritual prominence, and aesthetic significance, portrayed in temple reliefs and domestic scenes not merely as a consort but as a participant in the reshaping of ideology, a visible embodiment of both divine favor and human influence. Her presence alongside Akhenaten projected partnership and co-leadership, suggesting that she exercised a level of political and religious agency unparalleled for a queen of her time. Yet the very visibility that amplified her authority also exposed her to vulnerability. When the Amarna experiment faltered and traditional religious and political forces reasserted dominance, Nefertiti's name and memory became targets for deliberate erasure, her accomplishments obscured, her potential co-regency or independent rule silenced in the official record. This erasure is central to her enduring mystique, because it transforms absence into presence, compelling scholars, archaeologists, and the public to engage actively with the fragments that remain, to reconstruct a life defined as much by what is missing as by what survives. The iconic bust of Nefertiti, discovered centuries later, exemplifies this paradox, a singular image of exquisite craftsmanship that conveys beauty, intellect, and authority, yet offers no definitive answers about her life, death, or ultimate fate. Through this combination of visibility and absence, Nefertiti challenges conventional understandings of history, showing that influence is not only measured by recorded deeds or titles but also by the capacity to provoke inquiry, imagination, and reflection across time. Part 15 further considers the symbolic power of Nefertiti's story, emphasizing how her life continues to illuminate questions about leadership, gender, and the construction of memory. She exemplifies the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, demonstrating how individuals can shape transformative moments yet remain subject to forces beyond their control. The tension between her agency and the political reaction that sought to erase her highlights enduring truths about the fragility of legacy, the impermanence of authority, and the ways in which historical narratives are mediated by both intention and interpretation. Beyond historical scholarship, Nefertiti's story has taken on global cultural resonance, inspiring artists, writers, filmmakers, and historians who reinterpret her life in ways that speak to contemporary concerns about power, identity, and resilience. Her narrative illustrates the interplay between fact and imagination, demonstrating that the allure of mystery often strengthens historical significance rather than diminishing it. In examining her life, we are confronted with larger questions about the human condition, how ambition and vision can inspire transformation, how resistance and erasure shape memory, and how enduring influence often emerges not from clarity and certainty but from ambiguity and interpretation. Nefertiti's story also reminds us of the ways in which history preserves both presence and absence, teaching us to read between the lines, to value fragments, and to recognize that the most compelling legacies are often those that demand active engagement and reflection. In closing Part 15, Nefertiti stands as a figure who transcends time, a queen whose life and legacy illuminate the intersection of power, artistry, and human resilience, a presence felt as strongly in the modern imagination as it was in the temples and courts of Amarna. Her enduring mystery, her profound visibility, and her partial erasure combine to create a narrative that is as much about the act of remembering as about the person remembered, ensuring that Nefertiti continues to captivate, inspire, and challenge us, reminding all who encounter her story that history is alive not only in what is recorded, but in what is sought, imagined, and preserved across the generations. Part 16 delves into the enduring cultural, historical, and symbolic significance of Nefertiti, examining not just her life within the Amarna court but the ways in which her story has transcended time, becoming a focal point for understanding power, legacy, and human fascination with mystery. Nefertiti's life was remarkable in its own right. She rose to prominence during one of Egypt's most radical periods, the Amarna era, when Akhenaten sought to revolutionize religion by elevating the Aten above all other gods and redefining the role of the royal family as the visible and active intermediaries of divine authority. Within this transformative context, Nefertiti's presence was extraordinary, her depictions in art and reliefs emphasizing partnership, ritual participation, and symbolic prominence that rivaled or perhaps even equaled that of the pharaoh himself. She was portrayed performing sacred rites, engaging in state ceremonies, and participating in public acts of worship, suggesting a level of visibility and influence unprecedented for a queen and hinting at the possibility that she held political authority beyond the conventional bounds of queenship. Yet this remarkable visibility was inseparable from vulnerability. As the Atenist experiment faltered and traditional religious and political structures regained dominance, Nefertiti's prominence made her a target. Her name was removed from monuments, her memory deliberately obscured, and her role in the Amarna period minimized or erased. This act of erasure transformed her story into one defined as much by absence as by presence, creating the enigmatic figure that captivates historians and the public alike. Her disappearance invites speculation, debate, and imagination, ensuring that her influence did not end with her life but instead persisted through the questions and interpretations she inspired. Part 16 also explores the enduring power of Nefertiti's image, particularly the iconic painted bust that has become a global symbol of beauty, grace, and authority. This artifact transcends its historical context, bridging millennia to connect contemporary audiences with a figure who continues to represent intelligence, influence, and the intersection of artistry and power. Yet the bust is more than a work of art. It is a symbol of survival and legacy, a fragment that speaks to the ways memory endures even in the face of deliberate attempts to erase it. Through this combination of visibility, artistry, and absence, Nefertiti becomes a lens through which we can examine not only ancient history but timeless questions about leadership, gender, and the construction of cultural memory. Her story demonstrates how influence is not solely measured by titles or decrees but also by the ability to inspire curiosity, imagination, and reverence across generations. Part 16 further considers the philosophical and cultural resonance of Nefertiti's life, showing how her narrative illuminates enduring human concerns about the fragility of power, the tension between innovation and tradition, and the ways in which societies remember, reconstruct, and reinterpret the past. Her prominence in life, coupled with her near erasure in death, underscores the precariousness of legacy and the transformative power of memory. Nefertiti's story exemplifies how absence can amplify significance, how gaps in historical records invite engagement rather than passivity, and how the most compelling historical figures often exist as much in the imagination as in the archives. Modern fascination with her story, reflected in art, literature, film, and scholarly discourse, confirms that her relevance extends far beyond the borders of ancient Egypt, serving as a mirror through which contemporary audiences explore themes of authority, resilience, identity, and the human desire to understand and preserve what is fleeting. As Part 16 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as more than a queen of Egypt. She is a symbol of enduring mystery, a testament to the complexity of human achievement, and an embodiment of the tension between presence and absence that defines memory itself. Her life, her image, and her partial erasure create a narrative that transcends time, reminding us that history is not only a record of events but an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, between what is remembered and what is imagined. Nefertiti's legacy persists precisely because it resists closure, inviting each generation to reconsider who she was, what she represented, and why her story continues to captivate, inspire, and challenge us, ensuring that the mysterious Queen of Egypt remains an enduring presence across the sands of time and in the consciousness of humanity. Nefertiti's enduring enigma by reflecting on the ways in which her life, influence, and partial disappearance continue to illuminate the intricate interplay of power, identity, and memory, revealing why her story resonates across millennia. Nefertiti's prominence during the Amarna period was not merely ceremonial. She was a visible participant in an unprecedented cultural and religious revolution, one that sought to center the Aten, the sun disk, above all traditional deities and to elevate the royal family as living conduits of divine authority. Her depictions in temple reliefs, private shrines, and monumental art convey a woman of remarkable composure, agency, and symbolic prominence, often shown performing sacred rituals alongside Akhenaten, embracing a level of authority rarely attributed to queens of ancient Egypt. These portrayals suggest that Nefertiti's role extended beyond that of consort or mother, encompassing spiritual intermediation, political influence, and even potential co-regency, a reality that challenges modern assumptions about the boundaries of female power in antiquity. Yet this visibility was inseparable from vulnerability. as the Amarna experiment faltered and traditional religious and political structures regained dominance, Nefertiti became a target of deliberate erasure. Her name was excised from monuments, her legacy marginalized, and the circumstances of her later life obscured, creating a gap in the historical record that has fueled centuries of speculation and fascination. This tension between prominence and erasure is central to her enduring mystique, because it transforms absence into presence, compelling generations of scholars, artists, and enthusiasts to reconstruct a narrative that has never been fully recoverable. Part 17 also examines the symbolic and cultural resonance of Nefertiti's image, particularly the iconic painted bust that has become a global emblem of elegance, intellect, and mystery. The bust captures the intricate balance of human realism and divine idealization, inviting contemplation not only of her physical likeness but of the power, grace, and intelligence it represents. This artifact transcends its immediate historical context, serving as a bridge between past and present, reminding modern audiences that legacy is constructed not solely through survival of deeds or records but also through the capacity of a figure to inspire continued engagement across time. Beyond artistry, Nefertiti's story illustrates broader lessons about the dynamics of power and memory. Her experience exemplifies the fragility of authority, the risks inherent in radical innovation, and the ways in which societal forces act to suppress or reshape legacies deemed threatening or destabilizing. The deliberate removal of her presence from the historical narrative underscores the tension between individual influence and institutional resistance, highlighting how memory itself can become a tool of political and cultural control. Yet paradoxically, this very attempt to erase her has enhanced her modern significance, transforming her into an enduring symbol of resilience, mystery, and the power of historical imagination. Part 17 further situates Nefertiti in a global context, emphasizing that her story resonates far beyond the banks of the Nile. Her life continues to inspire reinterpretation and dialogue in art, literature, film, and scholarship, reflecting universal questions about leadership, identity, innovation, and the human desire to preserve and understand the past. She embodies the delicate balance between ambition and caution, visibility and vulnerability, presence and absence, illustrating how influence can survive, even flourish, through imagination when the record is incomplete. In contemplating Nefertiti, we confront not only the life of a singularly remarkable queen but also the broader mechanisms through which history preserves, distorts, and interprets the past. Her legacy demonstrates that the most compelling historical figures are not always those whose lives are fully documented, but those whose stories challenge us to read between the lines, to reconstruct meaning from fragments, and to engage actively with absence as well as presence. As Part 17 concludes, Nefertiti stands as an enduring emblem of human curiosity, artistic achievement, and the complex interplay between power and memory. She is a queen whose life, influence, and disappearance illuminate fundamental truths about civilization, authority, and the resilience of legacy. Her image, both tangible and imagined, ensures that she remains present in the collective consciousness, a mysterious yet profoundly human figure whose story continues to inspire inquiry, reflection, and admiration across generations, reminding us that the allure of history lies as much in its mysteries as in its certainties, and that Nefertiti's place in the annals of time is secured not only by what she did but by the questions, wonder, and enduring fascination her life continues to provoke. Nefertiti's life and legacy, emphasizing how her story extends far beyond the confines of her own time to engage questions about leadership, identity, and the power of memory. Nefertiti emerged during the Amarna period, a revolutionary era in which Akhenaten redefined Egypt's religious landscape by promoting the worship of the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities, and elevating the royal family as the primary mediators of divine authority. Within this context, Nefertiti was not merely a consort or decorative figure, she was actively engaged in the political and spiritual reimagining of the nation. Her depictions in temple reliefs, private shrines, and monumental art portray her performing sacred rituals, participating in public ceremonies, and standing shoulder to shoulder with the pharaoh, a visibility that suggested co-regency, spiritual authority, and a level of political influence rarely attributed to queens of ancient Egypt. The prominence she enjoyed during this time indicates a conscious cultivation of power and image, demonstrating that her authority was both functional and symbolic, meant to reinforce the radical religious reforms of her husband while also establishing her own presence in a society that traditionally restricted female political agency. Yet this remarkable visibility came with inherent risk. When the Amarna revolution faltered and the traditional priesthood and political establishment reasserted control, Nefertiti became the focus of deliberate erasure. Her name was removed from inscriptions, her monuments were defaced or abandoned, and the record of her potential co-regency or continued influence was obscured, creating a historical void that would fuel speculation, fascination, and reinterpretation for millennia. This tension between presence and absence is central to understanding why Nefertiti captivates both historians and the public. Her story is defined as much by what is missing as by what survives, and the gaps in her life invite an active engagement with the past, challenging audiences to reconstruct and imagine her influence. Part 18 also emphasizes the enduring symbolic power of Nefertiti's image, particularly the iconic bust that has become a global emblem of beauty, intelligence, and mystery. Beyond its aesthetic significance, the bust functions as a conduit for historical and cultural reflection, offering a tangible connection to a woman whose life was both extraordinary and partially hidden. The clarity, elegance, and presence captured in the sculpture convey authority, poise, and an enigmatic intellect, reminding modern audiences that legacy is constructed not only through deeds but through perception, memory, and the resonance of representation across time. Nefertiti's story also illuminates broader questions about the dynamics of power, gender, and cultural memory. Her life demonstrates the fragility of authority, the risks inherent in radical innovation, and the ways in which institutions attempt to control legacy by suppressing dissenting or disruptive figures. Yet paradoxically, the very attempt to erase her ensured the persistence of curiosity and speculation, magnifying her influence rather than diminishing it. She became not only a historical figure but a symbol of resilience, mystery, and enduring human fascination. Part 18 situates Nefertiti within a global and interdisciplinary perspective, highlighting how her narrative continues to inspire scholars, artists, and thinkers worldwide. Her life and image challenge assumptions about leadership, authority, and the representation of women in history, demonstrating how influence can survive and even grow through absence, imagination, and cultural reinterpretation. She embodies the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, visibility and vulnerability, presence and erasure, and her story offers timeless lessons about the human desire to understand, preserve, and engage with the past. In conclusion, Part 18 affirms that Nefertiti's legacy transcends the historical record, positioning her as a queen whose life and mystery illuminate enduring truths about civilization, ambition, and memory. She remains a figure whose presence is felt across time not only through surviving artifacts and records but through the questions, speculation, and inspiration she continues to provoke, ensuring that the mysterious Queen of Egypt endures as a symbol of power, intellect, beauty, and the enduring allure of the unknown. Nefertiti's life, emphasizing how her story has transcended her own era to become a lens through which we understand the intersections of power, memory, and cultural imagination. Nefertiti's rise during the Amarna period placed her at the center of one of ancient Egypt's most radical transformations, a time when Akhenaten sought to redefine the divine by elevating the Aten above all other gods and restructuring the very fabric of royal and religious authority. Within this context, Nefertiti was not merely a consort but a visible, active participant in the governance and spiritual life of the nation, performing public rituals, appearing in ceremonial depictions, and asserting a symbolic presence that suggested co-regency or even independent authority in certain phases of Akhenaten's reign. Her visibility, both artistic and political, was unprecedented for a queen and reflected a deliberate cultivation of influence, demonstrating that female power in ancient Egypt could extend beyond private spheres into the very heart of statecraft and religious innovation. Yet, with prominence came vulnerability. As the Amarna experiment faltered and traditional institutions reasserted control, Nefertiti's memory was deliberately obscured, her name erased from inscriptions, and the record of her role in the final years of the period left deliberately ambiguous. This act of erasure transformed her life into a mystery, creating a historical vacuum that has fueled centuries of fascination, speculation, and reinterpretation. The paradox of her legacy is central to understanding her enduring appeal. The absence of definitive information amplifies her presence, inviting ongoing engagement with her story and inspiring successive generations to reconstruct her life through art, archaeology, and imagination. The symbolic power of Nefertiti's image, especially the world-renowned painted bust, illustrates the capacity of representation to transcend time and circumstance. This artifact conveys more than physical likeness, it embodies authority, intelligence, and poise, inviting contemplation of both her historical significance and the universal qualities of leadership and resilience. Through this image, Nefertiti continues to communicate across millennia, reminding us that influence is not solely recorded in texts or decrees but can survive through perception, artistic expression, and cultural resonance. Part 19 also situates Nefertiti within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and the construction of memory. Her life demonstrates that power is fragile, that transformative ideas are often met with resistance, and that historical narratives are shaped as much by omission and suppression as by celebration. Yet the very attempt to erase her ensured her survival as a figure of enduring fascination, creating a story that is as much about interpretation and imagination as it is about historical fact. Nefertiti's example challenges modern assumptions about the past, reminding us that authority, legacy, and influence often operate in complex, nonlinear ways, and that understanding history requires engagement with ambiguity as much as with evidence. Moreover, her narrative has global and interdisciplinary significance. Artists, scholars, and storytellers across the world continue to reinterpret her life, drawing inspiration from her strength, intellect, and mysterious aura to explore themes of identity, resilience, and the relationship between power and memory. Through these reinterpretations, Nefertiti transcends the boundaries of time and geography, embodying questions and ideals that remain relevant across cultures and eras. As Part 19 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as a figure whose life, image, and partial erasure illuminate the enduring tension between presence and absence, innovation and tradition, visibility and erasure. Her story teaches that influence is not solely measured by contemporary recognition but by the capacity to inspire inquiry, reflection, and imagination long after the individual has disappeared from the historical record. Nefertiti's legacy persists in the dialogue between past and present, between what is known and what is imagined, ensuring that she remains not only a queen of Egypt but an enduring symbol of power, intellect, mystery, and the human desire to engage with history in its most complex and compelling forms. Nefertiti's life, influence, and enduring mystery encapsulate broader lessons about power, legacy, and the ways in which history preserves, distorts, and reinvents the past. Nefertiti's prominence during the Amarna period was extraordinary, not merely because of her aesthetic representations or ceremonial appearances, but because she existed at the center of one of Egypt's most radical social and religious transformations. Alongside Akhenaten, she helped usher in a period in which the Aten, the sun disk, became the focal point of worship, supplanting centuries of polytheistic tradition and redefining the role of the royal family as living intermediaries between divinity and humanity. Within this radical framework, Nefertiti's visibility in art and reliefs, performing sacred rites, participating in rituals, and sharing symbolic prominence with the pharaoh, suggests an unprecedented level of political, spiritual, and social authority for a queen. Her presence was not passive, it was an active assertion of legitimacy, power, and ideological alignment with the transformative vision of the Atenist court. Yet, this visibility also made her vulnerable. When the Amarna revolution faltered and traditional religious and political forces regained control, Nefertiti became a target for erasure. Her name was systematically removed from monuments, her image defaced or abandoned, and the record of her possible co-regency or continued influence obscured. This deliberate absence, rather than diminishing her significance, created a profound historical intrigue that continues to captivate scholars, artists, and the global public alike. The gaps in her life story invite speculation and reconstruction, transforming her narrative into a puzzle that challenges historians to piece together meaning from fragments, and reminding us that absence can be as powerful as presence in shaping legacy. Central to this fascination is the enduring impact of Nefertiti's image, particularly the iconic painted bust discovered in the early 20th century. This artifact captures her with unparalleled grace, intelligence, and poise, transcending mere physical likeness to communicate authority, elegance, and mystery across millennia. The bust's global recognition underscores how representation, perception, and cultural memory can extend influence far beyond the life of an individual, and how art itself functions as a conduit for enduring legacy. Part 20 further situates Nefertiti's story within broader reflections on the nature of historical memory, female leadership, and the construction of cultural significance. Her life demonstrates the precariousness of authority, the risks of radical innovation, and the ways in which societies respond to perceived disruption, often attempting to erase or suppress figures who challenge established norms. Yet Nefertiti's legacy shows that influence is not solely determined by contemporary recognition but by the capacity to inspire ongoing inquiry, imagination, and reinterpretation. Even partial erasure can magnify significance, creating a narrative that engages the human desire to understand, reconstruct, and preserve the past. Modern fascination with Nefertiti spans disciplines and continents, influencing art, literature, film, and historical scholarship. Her story transcends the specificities of time and place, offering a lens through which to explore universal themes of ambition, resilience, authority, and the interplay between presence and absence. She exemplifies how an individual can shape cultural and ideological landscapes, how influence can persist through ambiguity, and how historical memory is constantly renegotiated by those who seek to understand it. In closing Part 20, Nefertiti stands as an enduring emblem of human curiosity, artistic achievement, and the complex dynamics of power and memory. Her life, partially hidden yet vividly reconstructed, illustrates the ways in which influence, identity, and cultural resonance persist beyond immediate historical documentation. She is a queen whose legacy is defined by the intersection of fact and interpretation, presence and absence, action and imagination. Nefertiti's story reminds us that history is not only a record of events but an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, between what is remembered, what is lost, and what is imagined. Through this enduring dialogue, the mysterious Queen of Egypt continues to captivate, inspire, and provoke reflection, ensuring that her legacy remains vibrant, enigmatic, and profoundly human across the centuries. Nefertiti's legacy, by reflecting on the ways in which her life, influence, and enduring mystery continue to illuminate the complex interplay between power, memory, and cultural imagination, demonstrating why she remains one of the most compelling figures in ancient history and beyond. Nefertiti rose to prominence during the Amarna period, a time of unprecedented religious and political transformation, when Akhenaten sought to elevate the Aten above all other deities and recast the royal family as the visible and active intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms. Within this context, Nefertiti's role was extraordinary. She was not simply a consort, but an active participant in both governance and religious life, appearing in temple reliefs, domestic shrines, and monumental art, performing sacred rituals, participating in state ceremonies, and embodying divine authority alongside the pharaoh. These depictions convey a queen whose influence extended far beyond traditional ceremonial roles, suggesting that she may have exercised co-regency or wielded significant political power, a reality that challenges modern assumptions about the boundaries of female authority in ancient Egypt. Yet Nefertiti's visibility came with inherent vulnerability. As the Atenist revolution faltered and traditional institutions regained power, she became a target for deliberate erasure. Her name was removed from inscriptions, her monuments were defaced or abandoned, and the record of her later life, including the possibility of her ruling under another name, was obscured. This deliberate absence transformed her story into a mystery, compelling historians, archaeologists, and the public to engage with her life through reconstruction, speculation, and interpretation, illustrating how absence can amplify historical significance as much as presence. Central to Nefertiti's enduring legacy is the symbolic power of her image, particularly the iconic painted bust that has become a global emblem of beauty, intellect, and authority. The bust transcends mere artistic representation, it conveys poise, intelligence, and enigmatic power, inviting viewers across centuries to contemplate not only her physical likeness but the qualities she embodied: grace, leadership, and resilience. It stands as a reminder that influence is preserved not only in texts and monuments but in the ways people perceive, interpret, and continue to engage with historical figures across time. Part 21 also emphasizes the broader lessons that Nefertiti's life offers about leadership, innovation, and memory. Her prominence during a period of radical religious transformation demonstrates both the possibilities and perils of ambitious change, showing how authority, once established, can be challenged, suppressed, or erased by societal forces resistant to innovation. Yet her enduring presence in historical consciousness, despite deliberate attempts to remove her from memory, illustrates the paradoxical power of erasure. By attempting to silence her, history created space for intrigue, speculation, and ongoing engagement, ensuring that her story remains vibrant and relevant. Nefertiti's life is also a reflection on the construction of cultural memory. Her story exemplifies the ways in which societies remember selectively, how narratives are shaped by both preservation and destruction, and how the gaps left by absence invite new interpretation and imagination. In this sense, she becomes both a historical figure and a symbol, representing not only the extraordinary achievements of a queen in ancient Egypt but also the broader human desire to reconstruct, understand, and preserve the past. The global fascination with Nefertiti underscores the universality of her appeal. Scholars, artists, writers, and filmmakers continue to reinterpret her life, drawing inspiration from her intelligence, authority, and mysterious aura to explore themes of leadership, identity, resilience, and the interplay between presence and absence. She embodies a dynamic tension, a woman whose authority was extraordinary in her own time, yet whose story is largely reconstructed through fragmentary evidence and imagination, illustrating how influence can transcend the limitations of historical record and resonate across cultures and generations. As Part 21 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as more than a queen of Egypt. She is a timeless emblem of human curiosity, ambition, and the power of memory. Her life, partially hidden yet vividly reconstructed, demonstrates how presence and absence, action and imagination, and visibility and erasure converge to create enduring legacy. Through her story, we are reminded that history is a living dialogue, shaped by what survives, what is lost, and what is imagined, and that the mysterious Queen of Egypt continues to captivate, inspire, and provoke reflection, ensuring that her influence remains as powerful and enigmatic today as it was over 3 millennia ago. Nefertiti, examining how her life, influence, and partially obscured legacy illuminate timeless themes of power, memory, and cultural imagination, revealing why she remains a figure of fascination across millennia. Nefertiti rose to prominence during the Amarna period, an era of extraordinary religious and political upheaval in which Akhenaten sought to elevate the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and redefine the royal family as living mediators between divinity and humanity. Within this radical context, Nefertiti's role was remarkable. She was not merely a consort or ceremonial figure but an active participant in both governance and religious life, depicted in temples, shrines, and monumental art performing sacred rituals, participating in state ceremonies, and projecting authority and poise alongside the pharaoh. Her visibility and prominence suggest that she may have wielded co-regency or independent political influence, a possibility that challenges modern assumptions about female leadership in ancient Egypt and underscores her exceptional capacity to navigate the intersection of power, image, and ideology. Yet this prominence also rendered her vulnerable. As the Atenist revolution waned and traditional religious and political institutions regained authority, Nefertiti became a target for deliberate erasure. Her name was removed from monuments, inscriptions were altered or destroyed, and records of her later life, including the possibility that she ruled under the name Nefertiti, were obscured. This deliberate absence transformed her story into a historical mystery, compelling subsequent generations to reconstruct her life through fragmented evidence, artistic depictions, and interpretive speculation. Paradoxically, this act of erasure magnified her significance, creating intrigue that has persisted for over 3 millennia and ensuring that her narrative remains vibrant, enigmatic, and deeply engaging. Central to the enduring fascination with Nefertiti is the iconic painted bust, a symbol of beauty, authority, and intellect that transcends its original historical and cultural context. The sculpture conveys not only her physical likeness but also the aura of composure, intelligence, and symbolic power that characterized her presence in life. Its survival emphasizes the enduring capacity of representation and artistry to preserve legacy, showing that influence is not solely recorded in texts or official decrees but can endure through image, perception, and cultural imagination. Part 22 also situates Nefertiti's story within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and historical memory. Her life demonstrates the fragility of authority, the complexities inherent in social and religious innovation, and the ways in which memory is constructed, contested, and reconstructed. The deliberate suppression of her memory underscores the tension between individual agency and institutional control, yet her continued prominence in modern consciousness highlights the paradoxical power of absence. The act of trying to erase her created a space for speculation, admiration, and reinterpretation that has allowed her story to endure. Beyond historical analysis, Nefertiti's life continues to inspire artists, scholars, and storytellers worldwide, reflecting universal questions about identity, ambition, resilience, and the interplay between presence and erasure. She embodies the tension between visibility and vulnerability, innovation and tradition, influence and obscurity, serving as a lens through which to explore how power is exercised, remembered, and mythologized across cultures and generations. In contemplating Nefertiti, we confront not only the life of a singularly remarkable queen but also the broader mechanisms by which history preserves, transforms, and amplifies legacy. Her enduring allure reminds us that the most compelling historical figures are those whose lives challenge us to engage actively with evidence, imagination, and interpretation, demonstrating that influence often persists in the spaces between what is known and what is speculated. As Part 22 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as a timeless emblem of power, intellect, and mystery, a queen whose life and partial disappearance illuminate fundamental truths about human ambition, memory, and the construction of legacy. Her presence continues to resonate not only through surviving artifacts and inscriptions but through the questions, reflections, and inspirations she generates across the world, ensuring that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt remains a vibrant, compelling, and profoundly human figure in history and imagination alike, a testament to the enduring fascination that arises when brilliance, beauty, and mystery converge in a single life. Nefertiti, exploring how her life, influence, and the deliberate obscurity of her later years offer profound insights into the interplay of power, memory, and cultural legacy. Nefertiti rose to prominence during the Amarna period, an era marked by sweeping religious and political transformation, when Akhenaten attempted to elevate the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and recast the royal family as direct intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds. In this context, Nefertiti's role was remarkable and far from conventional. She was depicted in temple reliefs, private shrines, and monumental art performing sacred rituals, participating in public ceremonies, and asserting authority alongside the pharaoh, suggesting a level of influence that may have approached co-regency. Her presence communicated power, poise, and divine favor, reflecting a deliberate cultivation of visibility that reinforced both her personal authority and the revolutionary vision of the Atenist court. Yet, as with all moments of radical innovation, this visibility carried inherent risk. When the Amarna experiment waned and the traditional priesthood and political institutions reasserted dominance, Nefertiti's prominence became a liability. Her name was systematically removed from monuments, inscriptions were altered or destroyed, and her potential continued influence, possibly as a ruler under the name Nefertiti, was obscured. This deliberate act of erasure transformed her story into a mystery, compelling generations of historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts to reconstruct her life through fragments, artistic representations, and interpretive scholarship. Paradoxically, this absence heightened her allure, creating a legacy defined as much by what is missing as by what survives, and ensuring that her life continues to inspire inquiry, speculation, and cultural fascination. Central to her enduring impact is the iconic painted bust of Nefertiti, a work that transcends its original historical context to embody timeless ideals of beauty, intelligence, and authority. Beyond aesthetic admiration, the bust communicates the essence of her persona, composure, strength, and enigmatic presence, offering a tangible link to a woman whose historical narrative is partly lost and partly reconstructed through imagination. Its survival demonstrates the enduring power of art to preserve legacy and influence perception across millennia, highlighting that human memory and cultural resonance are as vital to history as written records or political deeds. Part 23 also situates Nefertiti's life within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and the construction of historical memory. Her prominence illustrates the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, demonstrating that authority and influence are not solely dependent on titles or formal recognition but also on the ability to shape ideology, culture, and perception. Her near erasure underscores the fragility of legacy, while her continued fascination highlights the paradoxical power of absence. The attempts to remove her from memory amplified her significance, creating a narrative that demands active engagement and interpretation. Nefertiti's story resonates across disciplines and cultures, inspiring artists, writers, filmmakers, and scholars to reinterpret her life and legacy, drawing lessons about ambition, resilience, identity, and the dynamics of power. She embodies a tension that is both historical and universal, a woman whose authority was extraordinary in her own time, whose life was partially obscured, and whose influence endures through imagination, inquiry, and cultural memory. Moreover, her narrative challenges us to consider how history is recorded, preserved, and reconstructed, showing that legacy often resides in the spaces between certainty and speculation, presence and absence, action and representation. As Part 23 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as an enduring emblem of human curiosity, leadership, and mystery, a queen whose life and partial disappearance illuminate fundamental truths about the impermanence of power, the resilience of influence, and the ways in which culture remembers and reinterprets the past. Her story reminds us that history is not only a chronicle of events but a dynamic dialogue between the known and the imagined, and that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt continues to captivate, inspire, and provoke reflection across generations, ensuring that her legacy remains vibrant, profound, and profoundly human. Nefertiti, highlighting how her life, influence, and partially obscured legacy provide a remarkable lens for understanding power, cultural memory, and the human imagination. Rising to prominence during the transformative Amarna period, Nefertiti existed at the heart of one of ancient Egypt's most radical experiments in religion and governance, when Akhenaten sought to elevate the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and reposition the royal family as the living intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds. Within this revolutionary context, Nefertiti's role was extraordinary. She was depicted performing sacred rites, participating in public ceremonies, and appearing alongside the pharaoh in monumental art, projecting authority, poise, and divine favor that suggested a level of influence rarely afforded to queens in Egyptian history. These depictions indicate that she may have exercised co-regency or wielded independent political and spiritual authority, demonstrating an unparalleled capacity to shape ideology, public perception, and the religious landscape. Yet, as with any figure who challenges established norms, her prominence carried inherent risks. When the Amarna experiment faltered and traditional political and religious structures regained dominance, Nefertiti's influence became a liability. Her name was deliberately removed from monuments, inscriptions were altered or destroyed, and the record of her later life, potentially including a rule under the name Nefertiti, was obscured. This act of erasure transformed her narrative into a compelling historical mystery, compelling generations of scholars, artists, and the public to reconstruct her story from fragments, artistic representations, and conjecture. Paradoxically, the very attempt to remove her from memory amplified her significance, creating a narrative defined as much by absence as by presence, and ensuring her enduring cultural and historical resonance. Central to Nefertiti's lasting influence is the iconic painted bust, a work of exquisite artistry that has become a universal symbol of beauty, intelligence, and authority. Beyond its aesthetic brilliance, the bust communicates her essence, composure, strength, and enigmatic presence, providing a tangible connection to a woman whose life is partly lost to history yet vividly reconstructed through imagination and scholarship. Its survival demonstrates the power of art to preserve legacy and influence cultural perception across time, emphasizing that influence is not solely measured in written records or official decrees but also through the persistence of memory, representation, and inspiration. Part 24 also emphasizes the broader lessons of Nefertiti's life for understanding leadership, gender dynamics, and historical memory. Her experience illustrates the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, showing how authority can be exercised, challenged, and contested, and how historical memory can be both preserved and manipulated. The tension between her prominence and her erasure underscores the fragility of legacy while highlighting the paradoxical power of absence. Attempts to suppress her story intensified fascination and ensured her continued relevance, transforming her life into an enduring subject of study, imagination, and cultural reflection. Nefertiti's narrative continues to resonate globally, inspiring reinterpretation and dialogue in art, literature, film, and scholarship. She embodies a universal tension between visibility and vulnerability, influence and obscurity, action and imagination, offering lessons about resilience, ambition, and the ways in which individuals shape and are shaped by cultural and historical forces. Her life exemplifies how enduring influence often emerges from the interplay of recorded deeds, artistic representation, and interpretive reconstruction, reminding us that history is as much about human engagement with the past as it is about the events themselves. As Part 24 concludes, Nefertiti stands as a timeless emblem of intellect, beauty, and mystery, a queen whose life, partial disappearance, and enduring image illuminate the complexities of power, cultural memory, and human fascination. Her legacy transcends her time, demonstrating how presence and absence, action and imagination, and visibility and erasure converge to create enduring significance. Through her story, we are reminded that history is not merely a record of events but a living dialogue between the past and present, between what is remembered and what is imagined, and that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt continues to inspire, captivate, and provoke reflection, ensuring that her influence remains profoundly human, vibrant, and deeply compelling across generations. Nefertiti's extraordinary life and enduring legacy, focusing on how her prominence, influence, and partial disappearance illuminate broader themes of power, memory, and the human fascination with mystery. Nefertiti rose to unparalleled prominence during the Amarna period, an era of profound religious and political transformation in ancient Egypt, when Akhenaten sought to elevate the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and redefine the royal family as the living intermediaries between gods and humanity. In this revolutionary context, Nefertiti was not merely a ceremonial queen but a dynamic participant in governance, ritual, and public representation, appearing alongside the pharaoh in temple reliefs, domestic shrines, and monumental art, performing sacred rites, engaging in state ceremonies, and projecting a symbolic authority that rivaled or complemented that of Akhenaten himself. These depictions suggest that she may have exercised co-regency or independent political and spiritual power, a reality that challenges modern assumptions about female authority in ancient Egypt and underscores the remarkable scope of her influence during a period of societal upheaval. Yet Nefertiti's visibility carried inherent vulnerability. As the Amarna revolution waned and traditional religious and political institutions regained control, her prominence became a target for deliberate erasure. Names were removed from monuments, inscriptions altered or destroyed, and the record of her later life, including the possibility that she ruled under the name Nefertiti, was deliberately obscured. This act of erasure transformed her story into a historical enigma, compelling successive generations to reconstruct her life through fragments, artistic representations, and interpretive scholarship. Ironically, the attempt to erase her amplified her significance, creating a legacy defined as much by absence as presence and ensuring that curiosity about her life endures to this day. Central to Nefertiti's enduring legacy is the iconic painted bust, a masterful work of artistry that transcends its original historical and cultural context to embody timeless ideals of beauty, intelligence, and authority. Beyond its aesthetic allure, the bust conveys the essence of her presence, composure, poise, and enigmatic power, serving as a tangible link to a woman whose life is partially obscured yet vividly reconstructed through imagination, interpretation, and cultural memory. The survival of such imagery demonstrates that influence is preserved not solely through texts or monuments but also through the power of representation and the resonance of symbols across time. Part 25 also reflects on the broader significance of Nefertiti's story in understanding leadership, memory, and cultural construction. Her prominence during a period of radical change illustrates the fragility and complexity of authority, showing that influence is subject to societal forces, political opposition, and the shifting tides of historical interpretation. Her near erasure underscores the precariousness of legacy, yet her continued relevance highlights the paradoxical power of absence. Attempts to remove her from history fostered intrigue, speculation, and admiration, ensuring that her story remained alive in human consciousness. Nefertiti's narrative resonates globally, inspiring reinterpretation across art, literature, film, and scholarship. She embodies tensions that are both historical and universal, the balance between visibility and vulnerability, innovation and tradition, influence and obscurity. Her life demonstrates how enduring impact often arises from the interplay between documented deeds, artistic expression, and the human imagination, emphasizing that history is as much about engagement with fragments and questions as it is about certainties. In conclusion, Part 25 affirms Nefertiti's status as a timeless emblem of power, intellect, beauty, and mystery, a queen whose life and partially hidden story illuminate the dynamics of authority, memory, and cultural fascination. Her presence continues to resonate across millennia, reminding us that history is a living dialogue shaped by what is remembered, what is lost, and what is imagined, and that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt remains a compelling figure whose legacy endures, captivates, and inspires across generations, illustrating that the convergence of brilliance, resilience, and mystery creates a timeless human fascination that transcends the boundaries of time, culture, and historical record. Nefertiti's life, legacy, and the enduring fascination surrounding her, emphasizing how her story reveals the complex intersections of power, memory, art, and cultural imagination. Nefertiti emerged as a preeminent figure during the Amarna period, a transformative era in which Akhenaten reshaped Egypt's religious and political landscape by elevating the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and positioning the royal family as living conduits between divinity and humanity. In this extraordinary context, Nefertiti's prominence was unparalleled. She is depicted in temples, shrines, and monumental art performing sacred rituals, participating in public ceremonies, and sharing symbolic authority with the pharaoh in ways that suggest she may have wielded co-regency or significant independent power. Her presence was a deliberate assertion of legitimacy, influence, and ideological alignment with Akhenaten's revolutionary vision, reflecting a queen who transcended conventional roles and embodied both political and spiritual authority. Yet with such prominence came vulnerability. As the Atenist experiment waned and traditional institutions regained control, Nefertiti's visibility became a liability. Her name was deliberately erased from monuments, inscriptions defaced or altered, and the details of her later life, including possible rulership under the name Nefertiti, were obscured. This deliberate marginalization transformed her story into a compelling historical mystery, compelling generations of scholars, archaeologists, and the global public to reconstruct her life through fragments, artistic depictions, and careful interpretation. Paradoxically, this very attempt to remove her from history amplified her allure, creating a narrative defined as much by absence as by presence, and ensuring that her legacy continues to resonate across centuries. Central to Nefertiti's enduring significance is the iconic painted bust, a work that transcends its original context to embody ideals of beauty, intelligence, and authority. The bust conveys more than her physical likeness; it captures composure, strength, and enigmatic presence, providing a tangible connection to a woman whose life was partially erased yet remains vividly alive through representation and imagination. Its survival demonstrates the power of art to preserve legacy and influence perception across time, highlighting that enduring influence can transcend textual records and political decrees, existing instead through cultural memory and symbolic resonance. Part 26 also situates Nefertiti's story within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and the construction of historical memory. Her life exemplifies the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, showing that authority is both exercised and contested, and that legacy is constantly negotiated through societal forces, institutional opposition, and the selective preservation or erasure of memory. Nefertiti's near erasure underscores the fragility of power, yet her continued fascination highlights the paradoxical force of absence. The act of attempting to remove her strengthened her mystique, ensuring that she remained a subject of inquiry, imagination, and admiration. Globally, her story continues to inspire reinterpretation across disciplines, from archaeology and history to art, literature, and film. She embodies tensions that are both specific and universal, the interplay of visibility and vulnerability, influence and obscurity, action and imagination. Her life illustrates how enduring legacy is often created not solely through deeds recorded in history, but through the interaction of representation, interpretation, and the human fascination with mystery. As Part 26 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as a timeless emblem of intellect, beauty, power, and enigma, a queen whose life, partial disappearance, and symbolic resonance illuminate the mechanisms of authority, memory, and cultural fascination. Her legacy transcends time, offering lessons about the persistence of influence, the dynamics of memory, and the human desire to understand and reconstruct the past. Through her story, history becomes not merely a record of events but a living dialogue between certainty and speculation, presence and absence, reality and imagination. Nefertiti's enduring presence in art, scholarship, and global consciousness ensures that she remains a profoundly compelling figure, whose brilliance, mystery, and resilience continue to captivate, inspire, and provoke reflection, affirming that the allure of the enigmatic Queen of Egypt is as timeless and powerful today as it was over 3,000 years ago. Nefertiti, examining how her legacy continues to shape our understanding of power, cultural memory, and historical imagination. Rising to prominence during the Amarna period, Nefertiti existed at the heart of one of ancient Egypt's most radical social and religious experiments, when Akhenaten elevated the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and positioned the royal family as the visible, active intermediaries between divinity and humanity. Within this transformative context, Nefertiti's role was extraordinary. She appeared in temples, private shrines, and monumental art performing sacred rituals, participating in state ceremonies, and projecting symbolic authority alongside the pharaoh, suggesting a potential co-regency or a level of influence that extended beyond conventional queenly duties. Her visibility and prominence reflected not only her personal agency but also a strategic alignment with Akhenaten's revolutionary religious ideology, marking her as both a spiritual and political figure whose presence shaped public perception and reinforced the legitimacy of the Atenist reforms. Yet Nefertiti's prominence was fraught with vulnerability. As the Amarna experiment waned and traditional political and religious structures regained dominance, she became a target for erasure. Her name was systematically removed from monuments, inscriptions defaced or altered, and the record of her later life, including the possibility that she ruled under the name Nefertiti, was obscured. This deliberate marginalization transformed her narrative into a compelling historical mystery, prompting generations of scholars, archaeologists, and enthusiasts to reconstruct her story through fragmentary evidence, artistic depictions, and interpretive analysis. Paradoxically, this attempt to erase her only amplified her significance, ensuring that the intrigue surrounding her life would persist for millennia, and transforming her into a figure whose story is defined as much by absence as presence. Central to Nefertiti's enduring cultural and historical impact is the iconic painted bust, a work of unparalleled artistry that transcends its original temporal and geographic context to embody timeless ideals of beauty, authority, and intellect. The bust conveys more than physical likeness. It captures the composure, elegance, and enigmatic power that defined her presence in life, creating a tangible connection to a woman whose historical record is both incomplete and evocative. Its survival underscores the ability of art to preserve legacy, demonstrating that influence can endure not only through written records or political decrees but through representation, perception, and symbolic resonance that engages viewers across centuries. Part 27 also situates Nefertiti's story within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and the construction of historical memory. Her life exemplifies the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, illustrating that authority is both achieved and contested, and that cultural memory is constantly shaped, suppressed, and reimagined by successive generations. Her near erasure highlights the fragility of legacy, while her continued fascination emphasizes the paradoxical power of absence. The very attempts to remove her from history magnified her allure, ensuring that her story would remain a focus of scholarly inquiry, artistic inspiration, and popular imagination. Globally, Nefertiti's narrative continues to resonate, inspiring reinterpretation in art, literature, film, and academic study. She embodies tensions that are both historically specific and universally human, the interplay between visibility and vulnerability, influence and obscurity, presence and imagination. Her life demonstrates that enduring legacy often emerges not only through deeds or official recognition but through representation, memory, and the human fascination with mystery. As Part 27 concludes, Nefertiti stands as a timeless emblem of intellect, beauty, power, and enigma, a queen whose life, partial disappearance, and symbolic resonance illuminate the dynamics of authority, memory, and cultural fascination. Her legacy transcends the confines of time, offering enduring lessons about the persistence of influence, the construction of memory, and the capacity of human imagination to engage with the past. Through her story, we understand that history is not merely a chronological record but a living dialogue between what is known and what is imagined, what is present and what is absent, what is recorded and what is reconstructed. Nefertiti's enduring presence in art, scholarship, and global consciousness ensures that she remains a profoundly compelling figure whose brilliance, mystery, and resilience continue to captivate, inspire, and provoke reflection, affirming that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt continues to command fascination, admiration, and reverence across cultures and generations. Her story is vibrant and powerful today as it was thousands of years ago. Nefertiti, highlighting how her story transcends her own time to illuminate broader themes of power, legacy, and cultural memory. Nefertiti rose to prominence during the Amarna period, a revolutionary era in ancient Egypt when Akhenaten elevated the Aten, the sun disk, above all other deities and repositioned the royal family as direct intermediaries between the divine and the human world. Within this transformative framework, Nefertiti's role was unprecedented. She was depicted performing sacred rituals, participating in public ceremonies, and appearing alongside the pharaoh in monumental art, projecting authority, composure, and divine favor. These portrayals suggest that she may have exercised co-regency or wielded significant independent power, challenging modern assumptions about female authority in ancient Egypt and emphasizing the remarkable scope of her influence during a period of religious, political, and cultural upheaval. Her visibility, however, came with inherent risk. As the Amarna experiment faltered and traditional religious and political institutions regained strength, Nefertiti became a target for deliberate erasure. Her name was systematically removed from monuments, inscriptions altered or destroyed, and the details of her later life, including possible rulership under the name Nefertiti, were obscured. This act of deliberate marginalization transformed her narrative into a historical enigma, compelling successive generations to reconstruct her story from fragments, artistic representations, and interpretive scholarship. Paradoxically, these attempts at erasure only enhanced her mystique, creating a legacy defined as much by absence as presence and ensuring that curiosity about her life would endure for thousands of years. Central to Nefertiti's lasting significance is the iconic painted bust, a masterpiece that transcends its original context to embody enduring ideals of beauty, intelligence, and authority. Beyond its aesthetic appeal, the bust communicates the essence of Nefertiti's persona, poise, composure, and enigmatic power, offering a tangible connection to a woman whose life remains partially hidden yet vividly reconstructed through art and scholarship. Its survival underscores the ability of visual representation to preserve influence across centuries, illustrating that legacy is maintained not only through texts or political decrees but also through perception, memory, and cultural resonance. Part 28 also situates Nefertiti's story within broader reflections on leadership, gender, and the dynamics of historical memory. Her life exemplifies the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, showing that authority is both exercised and contested, and that memory is constantly negotiated through societal forces, institutional resistance, and the selective preservation or suppression of evidence. Nefertiti's near erasure highlights the fragility of power, while her enduring fascination demonstrates the paradoxical force of absence. Attempts to remove her from history amplified her significance, ensuring her life remained a focus of inquiry, interpretation, and inspiration. Globally, Nefertiti continues to captivate scholars, artists, writers, and audiences, embodying tensions that are both historically specific and universally human: the interplay of visibility and vulnerability, influence and obscurity, action and imagination. Her life demonstrates that enduring legacy often arises not only from deeds recorded in history but also from representation, cultural memory, and the human drive to reconstruct and understand the past. As Part 28 concludes, Nefertiti emerges as a timeless symbol of intellect, beauty, power, and mystery, a queen whose life, partial disappearance, and symbolic resonance illuminate the mechanisms of authority, memory, and fascination. Her influence transcends time, offering lessons about the persistence of power, the construction of cultural memory, and the human imagination's role in shaping historical understanding. Through her story, we learn that history is not merely a record of events but a dynamic dialogue between what is known and what is imagined, what is present and what is absent, what survives and what is reconstructed. Nefertiti's enduring presence in art, scholarship, and global consciousness ensures that she remains a profoundly compelling figure, whose brilliance, resilience, and mystery continue to inspire reflection, admiration, and fascination, affirming that the enigmatic Queen of Egypt commands attention and reverence across centuries. Her story is powerful and captivating today as it was over 3 millennia ago. Nefertiti's legacy, tracing how archaeology, nationalism, global ethics, and popular culture have reshaped her meaning in the contemporary world while continuing to amplify her mystery. In the centuries following the decline of the Amarna period, Nefertiti faded almost completely from recorded Egyptian history, her monuments dismantled, her name erased, and her memory intentionally blurred as later rulers sought to restore traditional religious order and distance themselves from Akhenaten's radical reforms. Yet history proved unable to silence her permanently, and in the modern era, her rediscovery became one of archaeology's most powerful moments of revival. The unearthing of her painted bust in 1912 by a German expedition transformed Nefertiti from an obscure royal figure into a global icon, instantly recognizable and universally admired. This single artifact, serene yet commanding, ignited worldwide fascination and reshaped how ancient Egyptian queens were perceived, presenting a woman who embodied intellect, authority, and refined strength rather than passive ornamentation. As museums displayed her image, Nefertiti became a symbol not only of ancient beauty but of Egypt itself, a cultural ambassador whose face came to represent the splendor and sophistication of a civilization that continues to captivate the world. However, this renewed visibility also sparked intense debate, particularly regarding ownership, cultural heritage, and historical justice. Egypt has repeatedly called for the return of the bust, arguing that Nefertiti is not merely an artwork but a national treasure whose presence abroad reflects colonial-era imbalances of power and appropriation. These debates extend beyond a single artifact, raising fundamental questions about who has the right to possess the material remnants of ancient civilizations and how historical narratives are shaped by modern political and institutional forces. In this context, Nefertiti's legacy becomes a living issue, situated at the intersection of archaeology, ethics, diplomacy, and identity, demonstrating that the past is never static but constantly reinterpreted through present concerns. Beyond museum halls and academic discourse, Nefertiti has also entered popular culture as a timeless archetype of feminine power and elegance. She appears in literature, film, fashion, and art as both historical figure and symbolic presence, often reimagined to reflect contemporary values about leadership, autonomy, and resilience. These modern interpretations, while sometimes speculative, reflect a deep human desire to connect with the past and to find enduring meaning in figures who challenge conventional narratives. Nefertiti's appeal lies precisely in her ambiguity. She is simultaneously known and unknown, documented and elusive, allowing each generation to project its own questions and ideals onto her image. Scholars continue to debate the final chapters of her life, exploring whether she ruled as a pharaoh under a different name, whether she died in obscurity or retained influence behind the scenes, and where her burial might lie. Each new theory adds another layer to her story, not as a definitive answer but as part of an evolving dialogue between evidence and interpretation. This ongoing uncertainty reinforces her symbolic power, suggesting that mystery itself can be a form of legacy, compelling attention and sustaining relevance long after political authority has faded. Part 29 emphasizes that Nefertiti's enduring influence stems not solely from what she did, but from how her life challenges assumptions about gender, authority, and historical memory. In a world where women's power has often been minimized or erased, her prominent depiction alongside Akhenaten and her possible role as co-ruler stand as quiet yet profound assertions of female agency in antiquity. Her story encourages a re-evaluation of ancient societies, revealing them to be more complex and dynamic than simplistic narratives allow. At the same time, her near disappearance reminds us how easily power can be undone and how history can be reshaped by those who control its records. As the series progresses toward its conclusion, Nefertiti emerges not just as a queen of ancient Egypt, but as a mirror reflecting humanity's ongoing struggle to understand power, identity, and memory across time. Her legacy bridges the ancient and the modern, the historical and the symbolic, demonstrating that the past continues to speak, question, and inspire. In Part 29, Nefertiti stands as a testament to the endurance of presence beyond absence, showing that even when voices are silenced and names erased, meaning can survive through art, imagination, and the persistent human desire to remember. Her story remains unfinished, not because it is incomplete, but because it continues to live, evolving with each generation that seeks to understand her, ensuring that the mysterious Queen of Egypt remains eternally relevant, eternally captivating, and eternally alive in the collective consciousness of the world. Nefertiti's story toward a reflective and thematic culmination, focusing on how her life and legacy illuminate the fragile boundary between power and memory, certainty and silence, history and imagination. By the late Amarna period, Egypt stood at a crossroads, and Nefertiti stood at its center, either as a visible co-ruler, a guiding force behind the throne, or a sovereign in her own right under a new name that blurred the line between queen and king. The ambiguity surrounding her final years is not merely a gap in the historical record but a window into the political volatility of the age, when religious revolution, dynastic uncertainty, and elite resistance reshaped the fate of those who once stood closest to power. If Nefertiti did rule as pharaoh, her reign would have represented one of the most radical moments in Egyptian history, a woman stepping fully into the ideological space reserved for male kingship, adopting royal titles, iconography, and authority while preserving a distinctly Amarna vision of divine kingship. If she did not, her disappearance still speaks volumes, revealing how swiftly influence could be dismantled once political winds shifted and how ruthlessly successors could rewrite the past to legitimize their own rule. In either case, Nefertiti's story underscores the reality that power in ancient Egypt was not eternal, even when cloaked in divine symbolism, and that survival in memory depended as much on later acceptance as on contemporary achievement. As traditional worship returned and figures like Tutankhamun restored the old gods, the Amarna experiment was recast as heresy, and those associated with it were systematically erased, their monuments defaced, their names omitted, their stories fractured. Yet Nefertiti resisted complete annihilation, lingering in fragments of art, traces of inscriptions, and above all in the compelling force of her image. The survival of her likeness, particularly through the famous bust, transformed her into a figure who transcended textual history, proving that visual culture can preserve identity even when written records fail. Her calm gaze, elegant posture, and balanced features became a silent counterargument to erasure, asserting presence where official memory attempted absence. Over time, this tension between loss and survival elevated Nefertiti from historical figure to symbol, representing not only a queen of ancient Egypt but the broader human struggle against oblivion. Part 30 also reflects on how Nefertiti challenges modern perceptions of antiquity by revealing the fluidity of gender, authority, and ideology in the ancient world. Her prominence alongside Akhenaten disrupts simplistic assumptions about passive queenship, suggesting instead a partnership rooted in shared belief, mutual reinforcement, and political necessity. Through her, we glimpse an Egypt that experimented boldly with theology and governance, willing, if only briefly, to imagine new forms of rule and representation. At the same time, her downfall or disappearance serves as a cautionary reminder that innovation often provokes backlash, and that those who stand at the forefront of change are frequently the first to be sacrificed when restoration takes hold. In the modern imagination, Nefertiti's unfinished narrative has become a source of enduring fascination precisely because it resists closure. Scholars continue to search for her tomb, to reassess inscriptions, to debate identities and chronologies, each discovery promising resolution yet often deepening the mystery. This ongoing pursuit reflects a deeper truth: Nefertiti endures because she invites inquiry, because her life exists at the intersection of fact and interpretation, where evidence sparks imagination and uncertainty sustains engagement. As the series reaches this stage, Nefertiti emerges not simply as a subject of ancient history but as a lens through which we examine how civilizations remember, forget, and reinterpret their pasts. Her legacy teaches that history is not a fixed account but a living process shaped by power, perspective, and preservation, and that silence can be as meaningful as speech. In her rise, prominence, and disappearance, Nefertiti embodies the paradox of immortality through mystery, reminding us that what is partially hidden can sometimes endure more powerfully than what is fully known. Part 30 affirms that Nefertiti's true reign extends far beyond the boundaries of time and throne, continuing in scholarship, art, and global consciousness as a symbol of beauty intertwined with authority, of innovation shadowed by risk, and of memory that refuses to fade. Her story does not end with answers but with reflection, leaving us with the understanding that some figures are not meant to be resolved, only contemplated, and that in this enduring contemplation, Nefertiti remains eternally alive, her presence echoing across millennia as the mysterious queen of Egypt whose silence speaks louder than certainty ever could.